stay next till they can't breathe. Claim they 5 stars, but sell you breeze. They say that multiplies by 3s. Line them all up and let's just see.
Bronzeville Radio in the building, Chicago, live on 35th and King Drive, straight out the Supreme Life building. I have a special guest today in the building. I'm nervous to introduce him. It's an honor it's the only guest, I promise you, this is the only guest we will have introduce themselves. That's how we're gonna do it. Like, this is the only guest, we're gonna make it special for him. Sir, sit next to me. May you please introduce yourself.
My name is Harold L. Lucas. I am President and CEO of the Black Metropolis Convention and Tourism Council, which is a 501c3 not-for-profit destination marketing organization for the historic Bronzeville community. We were formed in 1996 to address the issue of Bronzeville emergence as a heritage tourism destination and to make sure that we built the institutions to preserve the 100-year legacy of the Great Migration experience to the city of Chicago. Having read the book Black Metropolis in 1973, as a young community organizer, I went on a sojourn, my own life sojourn, for the next 30 years, or 40 years at this point, in working to preserve buildings and structures that represent the Great Migration experience to Chicago, which we can document began in 1916. Up until 1948, we were required by legal restricted covenants to live within the Black Belt, and that was part of a restricted covenant conspiracy imposed on the African American community and the migrations to this northern city by the University of Chicago in their attempt to contain that 500,000 blacks who migrated to this northern city seeking, quote unquote, the promised land.
Can please remember University of Chicago. Remember that. I'm sorry, Harold.
So we have gone about the business of building the community from the bottom up, saving landmark structures that made a significant contributions to the fact that the south side of Chicago became the premier African American heritage area of the city between 1916 and 1948. Once those covenants were lifted through legal restricted covenants fought for by people associated with the Supreme Life Insurance Company, specifically Earl B. Dickerson, attorney Earl B. Dickerson, attorney Truman K. Gibson, and attorney, the school is named after the attorney. I'm having a senior moment at 45th and King Drive. 44th and King Drive. TK, no, not Lawless. Who was the guy? It'll come to me in a minute. But the 3 attorneys fought the restricted covenant case from the Supreme Life Building from 1936 to 1948. And those covenants were lifted in 1948, and then we could move into other areas further south, like Woodlawn, South Shore, Chatham, and the other communities further south. We have saved the Supreme Life Building from demolition in 2001. We were able to secure an empowerment zone grant and forged a collaborative partnership with East Lake Management and Development and restored this building to its grandeur as it is today. It is filled with African American owned businesses, from the insurance company downstairs to Seaway Bank to our new Singalese restaurant, Yassa's, to Dan Knight's accounting firm, and to Black Star, which is right next door to us, and we almost in spirit share the same space in regard to our concerns for empowering young African American males and females in our community through economic development. So we have focused in on the 5 principles of the National Trust. The first one is focusing on authenticity. The second one is saving the sites, finding the fit between the sites and the community, finding the resources, and collaborating as broadly as possible. For myself, as an elder person now at this point in the game, I have done my job over the last 40 years in saving these structures and hopefully being able to create an adaptive reuse strategy for these buildings that enable us to create multiple sites and attractions within the destination. So our goal is to create all kinds of businesses owned by African Americans in the Black Belt between 18th Street on the north, 71st Street on the south, the Dan Ryan Expressway on the west, and on the east, we're going up from 18th Street to 47th Street, 47th Street over the Cottage Grove and straight out to 71st Street, including the Oakwood Cemetery, where the African Americans who served in the Civil War and also the Pullman Porters, some of them also have been interned in terms of where their bodies are buried. So we're clear on the need for promoting not only the Civil War and the history of the Civil War camps, but also the history of the Pullman Porters. And we have a signature tour called the Black Metropolis Pullman Porter Great Migration Blues Trail that we're marketing for the whole South Lakefront region of Chicago. The South Lakefront region of Chicago is the most important real estate in the city of Chicago. We're now embroiled in a struggle over control of African American institutions, and we are being compromised and regentified by outside sources and plutocrats in the government who basically want to govern our communities from the top down without being inclusive of the people who pay the taxes and the citizens of the South Lakefront region of Chicago. So this is basically a clarion call both to our new young executive director, Stephen Coakley, and that next generation of young people, because I would have thought when I started out on the sojourn, having read the book by Sinclair Drake and gotten in touch with him in 1973, that we would have gotten to the point of creating the wealth that we need to create to emancipate our children and stop them from being involved in antisocial behaviors in terms of the gang affiliations and the antisocial behavior of drug dealing as a source of revenue. We think that our young people are much smarter than that, and they have the skill sets to create all kinds of urban entrepreneurial businesses selling high quality products to each other and to the international traveler who is sincerely concerned and wants to know about the authentic experience of electrified blues. No, it didn't start in Chicago. The blues came up the trail with Jelly Roll Morton and Earl Father Hines and people like that, but it got electrified in Chicago by Willie Dixon, Muddy Waters, and Buddy Guy. And that's how it became electrified blues, jazz, gospel music, and of course the politics that elected and re-elected the first African-American president of the United States. So we're proud of that accomplishment. We're even more proud to be anchored here at the Supreme Life Building, the crown jewel of the Black Metropolis National Heritage Area, and to be moving into a succession plan, bringing on the next generation of young, progressive, urban African Americans, creating new business enterprises that we own and control in Bronzeville.
So for the listeners on the radio and also on YouTube, if somebody, even people in Chicago, I'm from Chicago, a lot of people don't even know what Bronzeville is. And some people that do don't understand the history of Bronzeville. It's not really much you can, and I went to public school in Chicago, and they don't teach Bronzeville history, even though it's a public school in Chicago. And I went to an all-black grammar school, all-black high school, and it's not taught in our schools. So for the citizens of Chicago that's listening, and for the people in the United States and all over the world that's watching, what is Bronzeville?
Bronzeville is the destination, the northern destination of the great migration of 500,000 African Americans coming up from the South. If you read Juliana Richardson's book, if I got her name right, if I didn't mispronounce it, I might have mispronounced her name. But her book is The Warmth of Other Suns. It talks about those three migrations. One up the West Coast, one up the East Coast, and our migration authentically to the Black Metropolis Pullman Porter Great Migration Blues Trail was up from New Orleans through Memphis, Cairo, Illinois, and up into Chicago through Springfield, etc. That is what we interpret as the Black Metropolis Pullman Porter Great Migration Blues Trail. It is a tribute to that 500,000 people who came north, put down their buckets, right? Went to work in the stockyards, steel mills, manufacturing plants, etc. Began to bring their children up. The statue at 25th and King Drive is a tribute to the souls of black folks. One of the most intellectual books you'll ever read by, I'm having a senior moment again, by Richard Wright. and not Richard Wright, it's by W.B. Du Bois, right? And that is the intellectual discussion of what we're going to do in the northern cities to break the cycle of poverty among the masses. And that book was written in the 1890s. So this is a protracted struggle, to say the least. I plug into it directly by being linked to Truman K. Gibson, who was original chairman of our board of directors. And he was one of the three gentlemen who broke the restricted covenants that enabled us to move outside of the Black Belt in 1948. So we connect directly to that lineage and that ancestry, and I'm very proud to be working with a young person in the name of Steve Coakley II in carrying that into the current generation and figuring how we create entrepreneurial business enterprises that link us to the real estate so that we can own new business and entrepreneurial opportunities as we prepare to host the presidential library somewhere in Bronzeville.
Deep. So right now, in terms of the business districts of 47th, 39th, 35th, and 31st Street, what is the status of Bronzeville now in terms of black businesses? I know we started here and we had our own businesses. Right now in 2015, what is the status of the storefronts, the real estate in Bronzeville right now dealing with black businesses?
It's unfortunate to say, after 20 years of struggle, that the only business or building still owned by African Americans on the 35th Street commercial business strip, eastern west boundary, western boundary 500 west of Stewart Avenue, eastern boundary to the lakefront, the Supreme Life building is the only building that is still owned and operated by African Americans. That is a statement of how the regentrification has affected the South Lakefront region of Chicago. So the three buildings that were part of the Black Metropolis National Heritage Area, or the Black Metropolis Historic District, that was designated in 1983 under Harold Washington: the old Defender Building, 3433 South Indiana, the Unity Hall, 3140 South Indiana, and the original, the second Defender Building at 2400 South Wabash, have all been developed and are being developed by other people other than African Americans. What that says is the black intelligentsia, the black people in wealth, did not step up or were not conscious of the contributions of their forefathers in creating the kind of commerce that we need to stay as active players in the inner city of Chicago. And I submit to you again, when we're talking about the South Lakefront region of Chicago, you're talking about the most valuable underdeveloped real estate in the city of Chicago. And if I would say that the place where 20% of the world's fresh water is existing, and where it has changed in our lifetime from an industrial area into a major outdoor recreational area, funded by federal money acquired by your president of the America's Great Outdoors in 2009, backed up by further federal funding under the Millennium Reserve Initiative, backed up by further federal expenditures for a new Park District Fieldhouse, 3 new sets of bridges, the Rosenwald complex restoration, and any number of other projects that have been launched in our community where we're not present in the appropriate numbers on working on those construction sites, nor in community benefits agreements that will put some resources there for us to develop adjacent properties on 39th Street and 35th Street that can complement the work of the Mariano's Food Store and the expansion of Draper & Kramer and the Lake Meadows development.
Wow. So somebody like to bridge this gap, because like I always feel when this story is being told in terms of Bronzeville, it's like a generational gap in between. So before we even lose the history of Bronzeville, like a question I would ask would be like, Bronzeville started off black businesses, black people, the black dollar recycling in the community. What happened? Because we still had black people, alderwomen, city council, state reps. They kind of stayed black. So where did it happen where we lost so much resources in the community?
We lost our civic associations. When I first started out, we formulated 2 things. Okay. We formulated years ago, 73, 74, 75, the Coalition to Save South Shore Country Club, which saved that building from demolition and created a body politic where we could hold our elected officials accountable to a civic engagement process that held government accountable for how that building would be utilized. Today it is our Ravinia, right? It's a very important, and it still is not operating at the level that it should be operating at. In Bronzeville, years ago we had, matter of fact, it provided the leadership base for your Alderman Pat Dow to come to power as the Alderman, the Mid-South Planning and Development Commission, which set down the plan for Bronzeville as a tourism destination. So these are civic associations of standing committee structures, which we're formulating here at the Visitor Center as we speak. We have a standing committee for historic preservation, one for heritage tourism, one for information technology, and another for hospitality training and services. If we're not specializing in these career paths and creating opportunities for our young people to excel in these growth industries, then we're not going to be on the South Lakefront region of Chicago to benefit for the millions of dollars, approximately $2 billion in infrastructure development that is currently being spent in our community. I'll give you an example. We have a plan already to build a new city out at the old steel mill plant on 83rd in the lakefront. If you go to 75th or 79th Street and take a ride across those strips from Jeffrey to the lakefront, you will not see hardly any open businesses owned and operated by African Americans, while a plan for the next 20 years is building a whole new city out at the old steel mill plant where 90% of the residents in South Shore know nothing about. Now, if we were talking about a welfare or a public housing community, you might say, well, okay, well, they don't know nothing, they ain't invested, right? And I say that with deference to public housing residents having been born at 662 East 38th Place in Ivy Well. So I'm no stranger to the politics of the city of Chicago. And what I'm saying to you, this is a black middle class, upper middle class black community where you cannot walk from 73rd and Luella to 75th Street and buy nothing in your community from somebody like you who look like you. You can't even go up on that strip and buy any product or services. And that is part of what we perceive to be a bigger conspiracy of ineptness by the elected officials, all of three who represent that district who are currently in the penitentiary will be going to the penitentiary, right? And those who are carrying the agenda of the University of Chicago against the wishes of the African American community, which is now manifested itself in a major fight over cultural institutions that still represent the African American cultural experience, most specifically the DuSable Museum board takeover by people associated with or paid by the University of Chicago.
Wow. So if to ask you a question in terms of your perspective, what is the state of the black race in Chicago, the whole city? What is the state of the race right now, 2015?
We're in crisis. The Hispanics have surpassed us in terms of utilizing the skill sets that Obama brought to power in terms of Alinsky-style organizing. It was utilized in Woodlawn. The model was set in Woodlawn. We picked that model up at the Mid-South Planning and Development in the 80s and the 90s. We have ascended our power to our elected officials who are operating as demagogues. They are not accountable to anybody other than the resources that they're generating through the projects, and they're controlling the employment opportunities, and therefore they have all the power without any accountability to the taxpayers. So we would get a Mariano's where we're bragging about the ownership of the companies that are going to build the facility are African American. We're bragging about how many jobs we're going to have, but we're not talking about ownership. Nor are we talking about the adjacent real estate properties next to Mariano's and how the community might have an opportunity to buy some of that real estate coming online and the presidential library coming online so that we can demonstrate ownership and capacity to create jobs and employment opportunities for our young kids, giving aggressive young men an alternative to drug dealing and gang affiliation and misuse of testosterone power, right? In terms of understanding how to truly be head of households and how to be the breadwinners for their family and reinstate the two-parent family, which is in dire straits in the city of Chicago and across this nation in terms of African Americans. And that relates directly to the police state and the shootings and the killings and all the things we experience across this country, and what I perceive the community moving back aggressively to the right once Obama leaves office in less than 18 months.
Deep, brother. Very deep. If you don't mind, if you can give like a, not a quick, but like a sort of quick way of giving an audio tour of Bronzeville from 18th to 51st.
Well, if we're going to talk about a tour of Bronzeville, we begin at Johnson Publication, 820 South Michigan, and we end at the President's House in Hyde Park. If we're doing the full-blown Black Metropolis Pullman Porter Great Migration Blues Trail, which the city of Chicago and Choose Chicago now has approached us because we're getting so many calls for that tour based on the Pullman factory town now becoming a national landmark. That's a all-day 5-hour tour with lunch, right? And so we would start at Johnson Publication. We then go to where we got off the train at the Central Station at 12th and Roosevelt Road, where there used to be a big Gothic building there where 500,000 people got. That was our Ellis Island. We then stop at Blues Heaven Foundation and talk to the young man who's the grandson of Willie Dixon, who used to get spanked by Coco Taylor. He's running that facility now. We then see the old Defender building. We go past Quinn Chapel, where we're still fighting down on 24th Street to represent our culture and history, and we're worried about what's going to happen to the Defender building. Some of you older people can remember having to sit in that gorgeous lobby and wait for somebody to come up to the little desk and allow you in to talk to the reporters when Calloway and other folks like that were at that publication. A great facility, great building, and we're concerned about what the adaptive reuse is for that structure. So we then come further south, we hit Martin Luther King Drive and see the Brownsville Walk of Fame, where we were able to get $14.5 million in 1996 to put down 96 plaques that talk about the contributions of African Americans to this great city of Chicago. It takes you to the gateway at 35th and King Drive with the Walk of Fame and the major map in the ground that talks about the entire Black Belt from 18th Street to 67th Street. We then come into the Visitor Center and see our current exhibit. Our current exhibit is why we were not present in the 1893 World Exposition. Our next one will be in partnership with the African American Cultural Center at the University of Illinois, the exposition of the 1933 exposition, which was chaired by none other than Truman K. Gibson, our board member. So we have a document in our case that shows that he actually was the chair of that event. So that was 75 years of us coming out of slavery, right? So this is about Emancipation Proclamation, the process of how we do that. It is a generational struggle that obviously is not going to be completed in my generation. When I started out, I would have hoped that we would have been much further along at this point, as opposed to struggling right now to hold on to the handful of African American owned institutions that still exist, while the University of Chicago continues to expand, grow like an amoeba in terms of if you go into Hyde Park now and go into Hopper Court right now, you could be anywhere USA downtown. It would not resemble what it used to be when we grew up there as children in terms of Hyde Park and that multicultural atmosphere that used to be there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What do you think about the status of Chicago politics?
I think that we're underrepresented, that our political leadership takes us for granted, that they operate as demagogues. Most of them are basically carpetbaggers who don't understand the history of Chicago, were not born here, have been put in place by their associations with the University of Chicago. Most of them have their degrees from the University of Chicago and are sycophants to the agenda of the University of Chicago, which right now is playing, if I can use the term, treating the African American community like a $2 whore in regard to confusing where they want to place this presidential library, not as a tribute to Obama, who came to Chicago in 1983, studying community organizing and following Harold Washington, met his Dione queen in Michelle Obama, who I've been to the plantation where her grandparents were from in the South, so we know where she comes from, right? The bottom line is he came to Chicago not seeking the University of Chicago because he already had his degrees. He came here to be an organizer and wound up organizing out in Argyle Gardens around the water table issue. So we know him well, right? And we know that he is not a product of the University of Chicago, and neither is the DuSable Museum. We create deference to that university using its power and wealth to regentrify the black community of Chicago. This is not a subject that I'm raising in the current generation. It was raised originally by Earl B. Dickerson, Truman K. Gibson, and Irvin Mollison in the Battle to Lift the Restricted Covenant. So this is not a new fight. It is a continuation of a fight over the past 100 years. We will be celebrating our 100-year centennial next year, the 2016, and we want to make sure that we are doing that by revitalizing and owning the development of the South Lakefront region of Chicago. That doesn't just include Bronzeville. We think we should also be working with people in South Shore, Park Manor, anything east of the Dan Ryan, all the way out to Gary, Indiana, all the way around to where they're putting in the new international airport, in a regional perspective of the South Lakefront region, which has changed in our lifetime from an industrial area. When I came out of high school, go straight in the steel mill, work swing shift, make a living, come home, feed my family, right? All that industry is gone, right? If you're not in outdoor recreation, if you're not in maritime, if you're not in transportation infrastructure, if you're not into information technology, if you're not using the technology to transfer goods and services throughout our community, where that dollar's going around 8, 9, 10 times, we're not going to be here in another 10 or 15 years. That's the prognosis that I have for Bronzeville.
Okay, for somebody in their 20s that's listening, what advice, with your experience with the fight you've been fighting, a tough fight, and you've been in the front of this fight, what advice would you give somebody 21, maybe some of the mistakes or even some of the pluses that you learned that can make it a little easier for them in this fight, and maybe just through experience, just give them a heads up in Chicago into this fight we fighting as a group, as one?
I'm going to use and I'm not a Muslim, I'm going to use a Muslim mantra: do for self. Create entities that we own. If you're selling t-shirts, if you're selling toilet paper, do whatever we can to sell high quality products to one another. Look where the growth industries are. Use the university programs. Incidentally, there is a K-12 curriculum with the National Park Service on Black Metropolis, so you can feed this information to your children. We need to revitalize our commercial business strips. We need to create chambers of commerce. We need to be able to control TIF dollars in terms of how they are allocated, because if there's no revenue, the local community cannot build enterprises. We're not talking about trickle-down theories from the top down. We're talking about building human capacity from the bottom up. And that's what the work has been. That was the work of Alinsky. That was the work of the TWO. That was the work of the back of the yards. Any community that's going to be economically self-sufficient has to reach down and make sure Bebe and all of the disenfranchised young people in the community are involved in ways to make a living legally, right, without having to deal drugs or being a part of some gang infrastructure in order to be tough, quote unquote, right? Because if you look at young Pappy and the young kids that just got murdered in these scenarios in the last couple of weeks, I want to ask them, why are you killing each other at 21 years old? That is fratricide, and we understand it, and it's been going on a long time. The numbers that used to be coming up, they're now 400 or 500 a year. You do that and go back into the 80s and the 70s, you'll see that our young people were dying 800, 700, 900 people a year, right? So this is nothing new. This whole police state attitude towards our young people, criminalizing us, and sending us into the criminal justice system to prevent us from competing in the marketplace, competing on jobs at McCormick Place, jobs at the publicly funded White Sox Stadium, jobs at different places where the basketball and the other team sports are being played. All of those are subsidized by our tax dollars, and we deserve a third of those jobs if we're going to be fair about the city of Chicago. And surely you can see the Hispanics making their moves every day to get their fair share of the jobs, and they don't look back and share anything with the black community as far as I'm concerned.
Mr. Harold Lucas, what is your perspective on what's going on in Springfield right now?
It's a fight that we're not even at the table anymore. We used to have Emil Jones, where we had at least one person at the table. Right now you have the inside people with Michael Madigan and John Cullerton fighting the status quo Republicans and your current governor, who is not having a good time at all fighting these bureaucrats on the Democratic side, which control most of the black legislators in Springfield. So beyond Ken Duncan and Maddie Hunter and Miss Collins and Kwame Raoul, there are not many representatives, and I got to bring up my old buddy Don Trotter. These are guys who've been fighting us for a long time. We miss Emil Jones' brilliance in being able to be a part of that group of people who run government in Springfield. But right now we're in a dogfight, and at least they've been able to play at least the people who work every day for Springfield. They passed that law the other day to keep some payroll coming in, else it would be tougher right now. But the bottom line is we need to be funded in that budget. We need to be, along with the A. Philip Randolph Museum Gallery and the Bronzeville Visitor Information Center, if you're going to ask us for our product in branding the Black Metropolis Pullman Porter Great Migration Blues Trail, certainly we need to be funded in this legislative session for general operating of our two respective facilities as the South Lakefront area of Chicago emerges as a premier tourism destination. And I'm going to say one more thing. Watch out for the politics of the celebration in the Fifth Ward with, what's the name of the group that had the outdoor picnic? I can't think of their name. The Chosen Few. $35 a pop, and they had close to 10,000 people out in that park. So it ain't like we ain't got no resources. The question is galvanizing those resources, turning out 70 to 80% of the voters, right, instead of 40% of the voters, and taking control of our destiny in this urban city on the lakefront that we deserve, from Jean Point Baptiste to Sable to today, to be able to have some control, at least in a certain segment of it, and that is the Black Belt. We're not giving it up.
I'm glad you just brought that up about voting. We had one of the lowest voting turnouts in the history of Chicago. Can you explain to the people, especially the younger people, the importance of voting?
Well, let me contextualize it for you. The patronage system under William L. Dawson, the goal was to control the vote, keep the vote totals low, and in return for your patronage favors from the white Irish who dominated the politics in Chicago. That was the history of it, and why the Black Democratic Party kept the vote low and returned those votes to the Daley regime for however long Daley and the Sun were in power. In return, they received patronage jobs. So we got away from our entrepreneurial spirit of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, and began to rely more on our good city jobs. As a matter of fact, I've heard that the rumor was in the old 8th Ward that they used to pray over their good city jobs, right? And we got away from our entrepreneurial spirit. It's as simple as that. And so if you're waiting for Mr. Charlie to hand you a handout, you're not going out and creating the kind of entrepreneurial business enterprises that we need in our communities to survive and to prosper. The number one goal here is to break the cycle of poverty that dominates the African American community. It dominates the African American community because our political leadership has sold us out in their own parochial, narrow, greedy self-interest of being demagogues and thinking that they run the black community, because they certainly don't. And there will be a meeting this evening at the Northeastern Illinois University where we begin to address the attack against DuSable Museum and the takeover of our authentic cultural African American institutions. And clearly, Black Metropolis Convention and Tourism Council and the Bronzeville Visitor Information Center, our doing business as facility, is an African American owned institution at the gateway to the Black Metropolis National Heritage Area.
Harold Lucas, besides that tonight, what other activities and projects are you working on for now and the upcoming future for Bronzeville? Let the audience know.
Well, our lead program is the Bronzeville 35th Street, Illinois Main Street project. We think we need to brand that from 500 West on 35th Street to the lakefront. We're working with Sherry Williams and the Bronzeville Historical Society to put in an African American pavilion. We also want to have a Bronzeville Farmers Market on 35th Street. We'd like very much to acquire the space, the 4,000 square feet of space across the street for a youth-oriented project around those developments, I hesitate to really lay out these strategies,
Right.
because when you lay out these strategies, those groups who are aligned with the politicians usually can run in and grab your ideas and go get funded for them, and you have a lot of inauthentic people doing just that. And I'll bring up the organization's Quad Community Development Corporation, is Tony Preckwinkle's political organization. They are getting funding. They've created SSAs, etc. They're doing upscale development, and they're neglecting the truth about the displacement of public housing residents. They're neglecting the truth about the boatload of money that the CHA is sitting on while they plan to put a Mariano's on the Ivy Well site with no community benefit agreement. So where's the community benefit agreement, Will Burns? Where's the community benefit agreement, Pat Dow? Or do you want to control personally all of those jobs as if they're your personal patronage?
Laughing uncensored, baby. Is there anything else you want to tell the audience while you had a platform now? Anything, Harold? You had that respect always.
The quintessential question that inspired me, and I think I'm in divine order at this point in my life. I've been through triple bypass, died on the operating table. Lord brought me back to continue this work. And I'll close with a quote from Richard Wright in the foreword to the Black Metropolis book that was written in 1942, the year I was born. And the quintessential question was asked at that point and still remains the subject matter today. And that question was, will the Negro find a meaning in his humiliation, turn his slums and his sweatshops into modern cathedrals, out of which will be born a new spirit that will guide him towards freedom?
There you go, audience. You heard it. The great Harold Lucas. Come visit him, and you can visit the Bronzeville Tours. Come to the Bronzeville Visitor Information Center. You can book your tours at phone number
773-676-6207. That's my cell. On the main line is 312-791-4167. That's our new phone number. We did have to change all our numbers and put up new websites, etc. Under our new regime. We're going through the same succession planning that you're going to see in the activism around what's happening with the DuSable Museum. So we're looking for that next generation of young board members to come and support Steve Coakley as the second as our new executive director. Our tech guy here is Daryl Height. We get it done. We keep the doors open. We've moved our bookcases out so we have more room downstairs to meet the next generation of young people who want to preserve the authentic legacy of Brownsville as an international tourism destination. I'd like to make one final recommendation. The radio station you guys have created is called Brownsville Radio.
Yes, sir.
I would recommend that since we are talking to the world, that we also enter the name international. So I would recommend that you name the station Brownsville International Radio, which I think would be most appropriate, because what I'm seeing, you're getting responses from all over the country to this dialogue on the airwaves, and it just amazes me that you guys got that kind of skill, and I'm just honored to be able to provide you with the base to launch this radio station and the connection to YouTube so you can also see these actual videos. I'm excited, fellas.
Man, that's a bold statement, a bold request, but coming from a bold man who put up a big fight. And out of that respect, the new name of the radio station will be Bronzeville International Radio. To you, brother Harold Lucas, we appreciate you always. Much love, much respect. One more time, if you want to take tours in Bronzeville, please call Harold Lucas at
312-791-4167 or 773-676-6207.
The tours are wonderful. They're brilliant. People brag about them. They love it. At the end of the day, they learn so much about their history. We will have these tours coming through the school system too, so we are booking field trips. If you want to book field trips through your school, your class, bring them out. How can you go forward if you don't know your past? Well, it's going to make you depressed because you don't know why you're there. You don't know your spirit. So come learn your history. Harold Lucas is the best at what he do when it comes to Bronzeville tours. So you come to Chicago, make sure you book a Bronzeville tour with Harold Lucas. Thank you so much. Back to some music right now. Thank you, Harold Lucas. Appreciate you so much, my brother. Thanks for visiting us today.
God bless you guys. Take care.
All right.